Maybe if you're joining us online through YouTube, by the way, subscribe and like, all that kind of stuff. Joseph has learned how to live in adversity. That's why this passage is so important. Because it's one thing to be able to handle things when things are going poorly. This week we're going to see that he knows both. He knows how to prosper. He knows how to flourish. He knows how to be a man of humility and be a man of faithfulness, not only when things are bad, but also when things are going quite well. And so that's a big part of what we see here in this passage. Last week we saw that God is with Joseph when he's in the field. God is with Joseph while he's in the jail. Big lesson for us is that God is with us at all times. Okay, so that's a great message. But this week what we're going to see is how does it happen when things start to turn? Because that is where we are here in this passage. What we see is that Joseph's heart is with God behind bars, and we also see that he is that Joseph is faithful to God before the throne. So he's faithful behind bars, faithful before the throne. And just the setup is we've seen up to this point that God is with Joseph in jail. At the end of chapter 39, what you start to read is that God is with him and that he was in charge of anything that happened within Potiphar's jail. That was the royal jail cell that we read about last week. And it's within that context that two new visitors, guests, come into the not so spa-like confines of an Egyptian jail. It is the cupbearer and the baker who are sent to prison, and Potiphar says, I want you to take care of these folks. So while they're in prison, they're obviously confined, and their faces are rather sad. Now, I would think that would be obvious, right? That the Pharaoh, he's mad at you. That's enough reason to have this hangdog kind of look. But Joseph comes up to them in verse 7 and he says, why are you sad? And so we pick up in verse 8 where it says, they said to him, we have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. And you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as formerly, when you were his cupbearer. Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so to get me out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. And here also I have done nothing, that they should put me into the pit. And that word pit is very important for the whole Joseph story. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost baskets were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating out of the basket of my head. And Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. So in this story, what we see up to this point is that Joseph is there to declare what these dreams mean. Now, when we look at dreams from a Western standpoint is completely different from how they're looking at them here in the book of Genesis. Now there are probably, I counted 10 different dreams that take place within the book of Genesis, and a lot of them come in twos. We see them in the Joseph story. They come in twos, the two of how he will be the exalted member of the family. We see two stories here of how there are two stories. We will see two stories in just a few minutes that will talk about the dreams that come towards Pharaoh. But a lot of times it seems fashionable these days, whether it's on YouTube or on any of the socials or even in a classroom setting, for people to say, follow your dreams, right? And I was telling Eli, I can imagine what Joseph would be like in one of those classes. They say, follow your dreams. And he'd be shaking his head, say, no, don't do that. Follow my dreams. That ended me up in jail, guys. That was a bad thing. But that's not even really a good description of what's going on here in this passage. He doesn't tell them to pursue their dreams. Because indeed, in their way of thinking, you can't pursue your dreams. Your dreams will pursue you. That's the point. You can't outrun your dreams. You can't even pursue them and catch them. They will run you down and catch them. But the real question is, how are you going to respond when it happens? That's really the only kind of factor here within dreams as a whole. So why is this important? Because Joseph is giving God credit for what he's going to do. Now, just so you have a little bit of setup here, now within the Egyptian court, they had people who had these books. They were considered the scientists of their days, and they would take these dreams, and they had, this symbol here of fruit, it means this. They had it in a scientific kind of tablature where they were able to figure out, you had this dream, it means that we're going to fight the Sumerians or whatever. And so they already had that in kind of a scientific kind of book. Joseph has no such book. So that's part of what makes this and the next interpretation interesting. He is able to do something that is very scientific that the scientists can't figure out. He's able to do it without the book. So that's what makes this significant within their worldview and the way that they think and pursue this idea of dreams. But he wants them to understand something about God, that God is not a God who hides stuff from you. He is a God who is generous. He will provide the interpretation that he wants you to hear. And so there come two interpretations. The first one, the cupbearer is told that he will be vindicated. The baker is told that he will be executed. And so that is the way that it all plays out here in the first 19 verses of this passage. And then that gets us to verse 20, where we see about the dreams coming to fruition. On the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, the cupbearer to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. So that is what happens here within this passage. We see that the interpretation that Joseph gives, it comes to fruition. That's important to see, that it's not just that he's nice and a friendly kind of Hebrew guy who's trapped in this jail and but he does his best, but nothing happens. It happens exactly as he interprets it. That shows that he has some kind of credentials that are worth listening to in the future. But verse 23, we see that cupbearer who receives this interpretation, this favorable interpretation, and who says, yeah, sure, I'll look you up once I get out of this place. Verse 23, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So what is Joseph doing here? Joseph is in jail. He's doing his thing. He does the interpretation. But I want you to see the way that he goes about living his life while he's in prison. He realizes there are certain things I can't control. I can't control whether I'm in prison or not. But I can control this. Colossians 3:23 says this, "Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for man." That's what Joseph does here. He is an excellent example to us of whatever condition, whatever station you're in, to work heartily as unto the Lord. Joseph, he is being faithful behind bars, right? We also see that he has a great penchant for humility as well, as we'll talk about. But he's faithful behind bars. That's when the page turns in this story. The question is, will he be faithful before the throne? He has been faithful behind bars. Now will he be faithful before the throne? And the significance is that these dreams seem to have gotten him into trouble, right? Dreams got him into jail. Dreams are going to get him out now. And so we see everything all of a sudden in just a verse or two absolutely flipped on their head. That this should be surprising to you as you're reading this, that you should be expecting him to stay in the jail, but he does not stay in the jail. He gets out. In verse 1, we read that Pharaoh enters the scene through his dreams after 2 whole years. You hear that waiting, right? So does that make a little bit more sense of our call to worship, that we are called to wait upon the Lord? That many times this is one of the key virtues of a follower of God, is that they learn how to wait upon the Lord. It is spoken within the Psalms. We see this in the life of Job. We see this here in the life of Joseph. Verse 1, "After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold," things are about to get weird, "7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile, and the ugly thin cows ate up the 7 attractive plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke." Now, folks, you are dreaming this. Imagine this is your dream. This is freaky stuff. Yeah. I think we've forgotten that, okay? You see 7 scrawny cows eat 7 fatso cows. That's weird. This would be in any kind of a horror flick, guys. This is weird stuff. And so, obviously, Pharaoh wakes up. Verse 5, "And he fell asleep," eventually, "and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted in the east by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream." It was a dream. Good thing. So we see this is a rather strange sort of dream. And then in verses 9 through 13, we see some action where the cupbearer remembers his promise. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I remember my offenses." Light bulb. I remember, oh yeah, that thing. I left the stove on, guys. Okay, I remembered, yeah, I was supposed to help that guy. "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged." So we know that. We read that in the Egyptian Gazette, right? That was something that everybody knew had happened. So Pharaoh calls on Joseph, and then we hear this conversation. Verse 14. "Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Okay, so you go in for a job interview, guys, and someone said, I hear that you are an expert in computer languages, and you can even invent computer languages, and you walk in there. What do you say when that rich, wealthy boss says, I hear you can do that, and we want to pay you a lot of money? You say, yes, right? Yes, I can do that. Or that's what you're taught in business school to do. So I hear. Verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. He says to the most powerful man in the world, nope, can't do it. I can't do that. The thing that you are wanting me to do, I cannot do. Next phrase, God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Do you see how much he gives glory to God in this passage? He does it in chapter 40. He says, God will give you these interpretations. In chapter 41, again, the same thing. He's saying, it's not in me. It's God who's great. It's God who's generous. It's God who gives us the answer to the questions you don't have, Pharaoh. It's God who can fix this. Verses 25 through 36, this leads to the interpretation. By the way, remember, this is without a dream manual, and the dreams were causing the scientists in the court of Pharaoh a bunch of fits. They couldn't interpret it. It was obviously using symbols that they'd never had before, nothing they'd ever considered. And so then in verses 25 through 36, this is what we read. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So again, giving God the credit. Notice how many times in these two chapters the word God comes up a lot. The 7 cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. So in one moment, and we'll get on with the reading in just a second, in one moment what Joseph does here is, at one point you're saying, Joseph, you should have said, yes, I can do this. But he actually has been quite savvy and wise in the way that he has approached Pharaoh. He has said, I can't do it. God can do this. He gives God the glory. And then he says, and Pharaoh, God has favored you. He has given you information that you otherwise would not have. So this is a precious gift that God is. So again, giving glory to God. I've lost my place, so I'll go on with verse 29. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land by reason of the famine that will follow, for it will become very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by who? By God, and who? God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of the kingdom. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. So By this point, Joseph should absolutely be rocking your world and blowing your mind. Okay, here's a guy who's been in a prison. Okay, now, a few things. One thing that should blow your mind in terms of the cultural IQ that Joseph has. Earlier in the chapter, he gets out of jail, he shaves. Why? If you've ever seen hieroglyphics, you know that the Egyptians are known for being smooth-skinned people. He is a Hebrew, and he has been in jail. He is hairy, and he is smelly. He is all those things. He puts himself in new clothes. Oh, great. Clothes get him in trouble, don't they, guys? We saw that the coat of many colors got him in trouble, and the garment that Potiphar's wife snatched from him, that got him in trouble. Well, now, that is going to be a symbol of him knowing what is the appropriate thing to do before a Pharaoh. He knows how he is supposed to appear. So culturally, you see that Joseph is miles ahead of anyone who's from the land of Canaan. Okay, so you see that. Then he says, here's something that you can't see, a spiritual reality. He's able to interpret a dream. So he's able to see something on a cosmological level that none of us could see. So culturally, he's way advanced. Cosmologically, interpretively, he's so different from everyone else. Now he's going to throw in a bunch of tax and economics and dispensing of material goods. So he's the best global socio-political guy you've ever met, and he just got out of a prison. Does that not seem a little bit strange? He already has a plan worked out. He's just interpreted this dream, and on the fly, he comes up with this stuff. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that Elon Musk can't do, okay? Elon can't do this. Zuckerberg can't do this. None of the captains of industry that we think are really amazing in terms of the way that they think, when you look at their systems of thought, you're like, who teaches you to think like that? Joseph makes them look like a bunch of punks. He makes them look like amateurs. He shows them how to run a country. He shows them how to administrate an international relief effort. This is something that people don't know how to do unless God gives them the wisdom like he gives to Joseph. So, if this weren't an ancient story, and if this weren't something that you'd read 1,000 bazillion times in Sunday school or had read to you or whatever, you would not see this coming. This is absolutely surprising and astounding. Okay, let's regain some of that. We should regain the horror of Pharaoh's dream, but we should gain some wonder as we gaze into this picture. And then Joseph, he receives some other parting gifts as well. You get this daughter over here. You get this name. We'll come and call you Asenath Paneah. Okay, sure, whatever you want to call me. I'll wear the name tag. And then he has 2 kids. And the question at this point, again, going back to the point, Joseph has been faithful behind bars. Will he be faithful before the throne? We've seen that he will up to this point. He's giving God the glory time and time and time again, right? He's, again, making sure that he is not the headline. He is making sure that all of us know that God is the hero of the story. Because God is always the hero of the story, okay? But here, in verses 50 through 52, we have the answer. Will he be faithful? Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. He's already married. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. The name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. These two names are really, really important to seeing just how faithful Joseph is. Manasseh. God has made me forget. Now, if you're a nerd like me, maybe you like Lord of the Rings, okay? And there's a section in Lord of the Rings where the two hobbits, Frodo and Sam, they throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. And at that point, Samwise Gamgee, the second hobbit, who doesn't get much publicity but should, he thinks, for sure, we're dead. We're going to die. And then he wakes up and he sees Gandalf is before him, and he's in a place of safety, a place where laughter can be heard again. And he looks at Gandalf and he says, Gandalf, I thought you were dead, but then I thought I was dead myself. And then he asks this brilliant question: is everything sad going to come untrue? I think that's a word for us. Is everything sad going to come untrue? That's in a novel. But see, this is what God really did for Joseph. He made everything sad come untrue. And that is also what Jesus has done for us. He's made everything sad in us, everything sinful, everything wicked, everything twisted. He's making it come untrue. So that's Manasseh. Ephraim. It's one thing to say that God has made things come untrue. Okay, so you're no longer in debt to whoever your creditor is. Okay, that's fine, good. But that doesn't mean that I have money in my bank, right? Ephraim does. Ephraim means you have money in the bank. Ephraim, God has made me fruitful. That's what his name means, is that not only has God made the bad things disappear, he has brought good into my life that I didn't ever think I'd get. This is a picture of the gospel. This is what I want you to hang on to. Now, it's so easy in this passage to say, that Joseph is faithful, behind bars, before the throne. Be like Joseph, right? I think that's where most of us want to go with that. Be faithful. And I'm not in favor of not being faithful, okay? But I know that a lot of you have had a very hard week. And there are some of you who want those sad things to become untrue. You don't need some preacher yelling at you to charge up the hill with power that you don't have. What I would say is that Joseph is a good example to look to, not because he is strong or wise. He's a good example to look to. His triumph is that he lived with reliance upon God. He realized he was weak. He knew he couldn't go anywhere. He knew that doors would not open for him in the jail. And he was able to live within that. So when the doors did open, he walked through because that's where God was taking him. He knew that God was always with him. He walked through the doors of marriage and parenthood because those were the gifts that God had given Joseph for that time. He wasn't owed. He wasn't due. That's also part of the magic, is that he's not thinking, God, why did you do this to me? He's able to say, I'm not owed, I'm not due. I get that. I don't deserve anything. And I know that everything that I get is a gift from God. That's something I have to work on, guys. To be able to have that sort of attitude, that's something that only Jesus can work in me. That's something that only the Holy Spirit can work in me. And the same is true for you. because this is not something where I'm up on top of the hill, I've seen the glory. This is something that I'm working through myself. I don't know anyone who hasn't had a struggle in this area. But he's quite clear, and he's quite demonstrative about this fact, that God is the hero of our story, that we can only do what God gives for us to do this moment and this day. And I think that that's important for us to realize and think about as a small church. We can't do everything, but that doesn't mean we can't do nothing. That as we are living out a life of blessing, as we are receiving God's blessings, and as we are praying this morning, guys, you are praying incredible prayers. You're thinking about not just ourselves. You're thinking about what are the needs in lives of children whose souls have been decimated and who are seriously contemplating self-harm. You're praying for that. That's important. That's the stuff of the kingdom. When we're praying for other of you who have decisions to make about loved ones, we're praying for that too. We're praying because we have this community life together. No church or Christian is due. Everything we have is a gift, and we only have it for that moment. So let's do it while we have it. Let's make sure that we are the people of God who are living out what 1 Peter chapter 5 says. He says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you." That's what we see here with Joseph. We see that this is the template. This is the pattern of humiliation leading to exaltation. This is actually what we see in the life of Jesus. You can go to places like Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. Remember that we're supposed to be like Jesus, who being God, even though he was God, he didn't consider that something to be grasped. But instead, he emptied himself and served us to the point of death, even death upon a cross. So, at the name of Jesus, every name under the earth and above, everywhere, should declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That is the humiliation and exaltation of Christ. And so likewise, we read here in Peter that we should humble ourselves because in the right time, he will exalt us. He will lift us up. He will cast all those things away. So why do we need to do that? Because your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. He wants us to rear ourselves up and say, "But wait, I deserve better than that." No, we're not due. We're not owed. Every moment's a gift. Everything, every breath, every day, every relationship, every sermon, every song, every prayer. All of these things are gifts and time that God has given us. And so we should consider them as precious jewels. Resist the devil, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. And after you have suffered a little while, the God of all grace, who has called you to his eternal glory in Christ, here's the payoff. He will restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. This is what it looks like to live humbly. This is what it looks like to live faithfully, like Joseph.